So, I would like to introduce our first speaker of the day, Zan Uzar, who is working on several media audio projects and will talk to us about how sound matters for your games.
Hello. I was not able to join assembly myself, but I'm sure that it's really exciting. I missed the game jam, so are there anyone who is participating in the game jam? No? Okay. This talk is mostly for sound designers and game developers who are wondering about how to incorporate sound in their games, not only for professionals but also for game students. So how many of you are working or studying game? Okay. What about sound people? Are there any? Good. A couple of them. Okay. I want to talk about why sound can have an impact on your game. Let's start with this example. Limbo, probably most of you know this game, has won some awards for its original and powerful sound design and music. So this is a scene from the original game. Okay. Sorry, I think I missed the order. This was supposed to be without the sound, but let's check the version without the sound and watch the same video without the sound and see what's lacking. As you can see, as the gravity changes, there is no feedback for the player to tell, like when's the gravity is changing. There's no feedback, and there's no way we could presume before it happens. And also there's a lack of mood and emotion, obviously. So that emotion of suspense and mystery is lost. So here we can actually see that sound is a tool to create emotion and provide information, and that's the most essential purpose of the sound in games. And here's another version of Limbo. This is a remake of the sound by different sound designers, a completely different take on the sound. The same scene, but the soundscape is completely different. So I'll kindly ask you to be attentive about the sound and see the differences between the original one and this one. I'll stop it for a second. So if you try to concentrate on the music, which is changing in sync with the change of gravity, you could see that sound is working as a powerful source of feedback for the player. And in this version, it's that aspect of the sound is even more exaggerated. Okay, so this was just a simple example of how sound can change the same game and take it to a different level, and without the presence of sound, what is missing? Okay, so this is a very famous phase about sound. Sound is the 50% of the experience by George Lucas, and this is kind of sad because, I mean, okay, George Lucas is trying to say that sound is important for me, but the thing is, this is just an act of trying to prove that sound is important. And it's actually, at the same time, showing that sound is different than the rest of the media. And it's creating this us and them sort of perspective. I'll come to that later, but if you go back, why we need to, even George Lucas needs to prove sound matters. I think this is the most biggest problem in the game production community at the moment about when it comes to how we see the sound. And I'm going to talk about why we should change our approach regarding this matter. Rob Bridget, on the other hand, from ADOS, says 100% of the experience is the experience, which means that you can't separate sound and game into a different source of production aspects. You have to consider it as a whole to create a better experience, because you shouldn't be affording to lose some players because you didn't think that sound mattered. Especially this is true in Finland, where mobile games are the most important games in the industry, because everybody thinks like, well, nobody uses sound in mobile games anyway. But you can't afford to take this risk, because actually that might not be true, and I'll show you some statistics about that later. That's why we should change our approach from us and them to the whole experience. But before going to that, I just want to, not all of us are sound professionals here, of course. So I just want to talk about the basic elements about game audio. So this is a very simplified version of the game audio elements. Of course, music is self-explanatory. There's no need to explain. And there's something called diegetic sound, which means that sounds that are happening in the game world, like a door is opening and footsteps, somebody's talking, and we can differentiate them from UI sounds by the UI sounds are just they don't happen in the game world, but when you click on something, you get a feedback, and that's abstract, and that's called UI sound. And let's see these categories in an example. Sorry. Let's go to full screen. I'll be commenting while this is playing. So let's go back and see it again, sorry. Okay. As you can see, there's this ambient sound, which is a diegetic sound, the sound of wind and the footsteps. And this sound is not a part of the world, so, and also this tapping sound. So they are UI sounds. So that's the separation. And obviously we hear the music here. So it's a very simple example. Well, it sounds very simple, but when you are trying to think like what kind of sounds my game need, you should be categorizing them in such manner. By the way, if you have any questions in any moment, please ask and stop me and ask. Okay, so those were the elements, and what are the functions of these elements? Let's look at that. We saw that sounds acts as an emotional and an informative tool, and music itself works in both ways. It can either set the mood and the feeling, or it can give some information about the game mode. For instance, from exploration to combat, or to sneak to exploration. So music can give that feedback to the player, thus providing an information. Sound acts as both roles as well. It can either reinforce the feeling of immersion and makes the player feel that the world surrounding him or her is real. Or either it can give some information about the game world and events, like somebody's shooting from a certain direction, or an enemy is approaching, this kind of information. And there is one more example about these functions. I picked Journey because I think it's very simplistic but beautiful in its sound design. So please try again to be attentive about the sound and try to see how music changes when the gameplay changes, and what do sounds inform us about. Okay, so are there any comments and questions about this? Just a recap. The sound is setting the emotion and giving us information. So when you're making a game, and you usually how it goes is that in the last minute people think like, oh, we need sounds, and they already missed some opportunities about setting the emotion and giving some information. And maybe they were trying to solve those issues, like how can I inform player about this certain game function. And maybe they could have solved that issue with sound beforehand if they had a sound perspective earlier in the production. I'll come to that later. Oh, sorry. Okay, lastly, I want to talk about the terminology. So, sound design can either be, well, when we are talking about sound design, we are mostly talking about content creation, which is like creating the sound assets. And sounds are created mostly in two ways. First is sample-based method. In this method, the sound designer creates or purchases a library and edits those sounds and puts them in the game, and those sounds are triggered through the system. So those sounds are not changed throughout the game. So they are designed sounds, predefined, and there's no procedural change in those sounds. But the second method involves synthesizing the audio on the fly in the game. If we make a comparison to video in games, imagine that computer 3D graphics created on the fly in the game, like your environment is rendered in real time, compared to using assets that you've done before and just triggering. If we compare those technically, sample-based sound design is more memory-heavy because those sound assets will take more space in your memory. So that might not be the best option for mobile games where the memory restriction is higher. Whereas in procedural audio, you don't use the memory so much, but you are depending on the CPU, which might work better for PC games. Of course, these are very rough distinctions. They can be used at the same time in the same project. And there's also something called sound implementation, which is not completely separated from sound design itself. But when you do the sounds, you also have to implement them in the game system. And designing behaviors for these sounds, how they react, how they respond to the player actions and the world. And people use usually middlewares for this, like Fmod, VWise, and Fabric for Unity. But you can also implement the sounds with a custom engine. And the beauty of sound implementation is there's such a organic connection between design and implementation. And when you're implementing sounds and designing behaviors, you go back to your design and change things because there's this constant synergy between them. I want to show this example from Uncharted 3. There are some commentaries, so I'll stop talking and let's watch the video.
Yeah. It worked.
Okay, so I think that was pretty explanatory. So yeah, so the relationship between sound implementation and design is organic, I told you, but sometimes, especially in mobile games, sound designers are outsourced, or even just game developers use some custom libraries, and the sound implementation is made by coders themselves, which is fine, but of course this is not their specialty, it's a special area of focus, so usually when you are not incorporating a sound designer in the implementation process, you might be missing some opportunities to create a better sound experience. I'll talk about that later a little bit more. Yeah, so the core of our topic is why sound matters and why we have to prove this. Because there are some problems in the game audio and also in other industries like film, but game audio is still far behind the movie industry in that sense. So from the developer side, sound is usually neglected because of several reasons, because vision is more dominant in our culture, and for many other reasons, but as a result, sound is usually neglected, and it's usually come to mind in the later process of the development cycle. And outsourcing, this is not actually, this might not be a problem. Outsourcing is totally all right. I'm an outsourcer myself. But because of the problems or possible problems I mentioned before, like you outsource the sound designer, but you don't outsource the implementer guy. So then there's this communication is broke down there. So that might cause some problems. So you should be careful about when outsourcing. Because when you're outsourcing a sound designer, you're not hiring their perspective usually, you're just hiring their sounds. Which means that there's no communication of no sound perspective from a professional in the game team. There are sounds, but there's no sound perspective. And if this outsourced sound designer is working remotely, the gap is even larger, because lack of communication means that there's lack of collaboration. So, and on sound person's side, it's not just the developers neglecting sound, but sound designers' approach is also sometimes not completely right. As sound designer myself, I know that I'm focusing on my stuff and forgetting about the game, and forgetting about the collaboration and the team. And I'm forgetting that we are making a game, so I'm just doing my sounds, which is not a good approach. So it's still the same thing I was mentioning in the beginning, us and them. So we have to change that approach. We should change that approach. And one more thing is that sound people usually remain being sound people. You don't see game designers or producers coming from sound background for some reason. They just keep doing their sound. But there are lots of people who are coming from art or design who lead projects. So on the sound part, I think we should look to ourselves and try to change that. So result of these problems are, there's limited time for good audio. You know, you can do only a certain thing in a limited time. So please try not to remind sound in the last minute of your game production. Yeah, communication of vision is weak. Like if there's not such an organic connection between the sound guy and the team, then there's going to be a lack of communication. What's the vision of this game? What's the idea? What kind of game we are trying to make? Also, I think all of the team members' input in the game is super important. Like even testers, of course, testers and even marketing people, sound people. I think the game needs all their feedback, and if there's no tight connection between sound and the team, this is kind of lost. And also, as sound people, we kind of miss the developers' feedback on sound, because I know that most of the developers just turn off the sound and test the game while they are developing. So lots of opportunities of feedback is lost. I talked about that before, so yeah. So what can we do to change our perspective? As I said, we should consider everyone as co-designers and not see them as just, okay, we outsource these guys and they provide assets for us, then that's all. Yeah, these 4 words, I think these are really important when making a collaborative project, such as games. So you need collaboration, of course. And to create collaboration, you have to act as a team and communicate and feedback between each other and iterate all the time. That's also one more problem about the outsourcing. The iteration is limited because you ask for assets and you got them, and maybe you ask for 1 or 2 reviews. But if you have a sound person in your team, that iteration will be all the time present, and game production is all about iteration. So yeah, these are some facts, but I was lazy and didn't put the source there. But if you are interested, I can send you later. You can send me an email. Yeah, and also this is important. In games, even if we are just a small indie studio, we are trying to create a brand, right? And audio is a part of that brand. Imagine a big company like, I don't know, IBM, Apple. They all have a certain audio identity, and when you hear it, you just know them. It's not just about a sound logo or something like that. It's also, if you have a very powerful soundscape that will be remembered, like Limbo or Monument Valley, I showed the examples. I mean, those games have such a powerful soundtrack. It creates a brand and identity, and it's in our memories. Like, imagine Mario. All of us know the music of Mario in our heads. So it's just there because it's a strong audio identity. Also, this is clear that 100% of the experience is experience. So better audio means better experience. And yeah, it's definitely more fun not to do everything yourself and have certain people for certain aspects of the game. It's more fun to develop it this way. Also, you should change your pipeline. So these are mostly recaps, so I'm going to be quick about these. So just try to have a sound perspective from the start of your game and think about it from the start while you're even doing paper designs, and try to imagine that how it's going to sound like, or how can I use the sound to introduce this function. I'm going to show some examples from my own work later, of this. So try to implement, if you're incorporating a sound designer, try to get them early in the process. So try to create a collaborative ground where people can communicate. This means that working in the same space helps a lot. It instantly creates a communication between people. And yeah, if you are leading the team, just encourage this interaction and just encourage people giving them feedback. Sound designers giving feedback to graphics and coders giving feedback to sound, this kind of stuff. And think about the sound implementation and how can technical sound design means. I showed you a video about Uncharted 3. You saw that how the implementation can change your perspective of sound design, so be aware of that. And knowing your resources is important. If you have just one sound designer for everything, even including music, then there's going to be limited things that he or she can achieve. So you should be aware that what you should or can ask of him or her. And this is also an important point. If you are purchasing your music and sounds from a library, you should definitely give those library authors credits in your game. Not because that it's ethically right for me, but also those guys will pay you back by advertising your game in their own social network and websites. Yeah, and also try to be transparent about your work. If you are designing if you are designing 3D graphics, just share it with the sound designer. And if you are designing this new sound system for the game, just talk this about your designer and just share this information and be transparent about your process. You will get a lot of feedback, and it will be more fun and it will be more productive. So I want to show you an example from a game I've been working on since last year. It's in alpha stage. So in this game, I try to implement these ideas I've been talking about myself, and somehow some of them I was successful and some of them I failed. But we had a strong sound identity from the start. We just talk about, okay, how's that going to sound like, and this kind of stuff from the start. And that affected quite a lot how we created an immersive atmosphere. And also, sound perspective helped to solve some design-related issues. And, okay, let's see this video.
Victoria could feel the dark reaching out to her, drawing her in, whispering. You know what to do. Follow your instinct. Look around. Look beyond. The surge of energy overwhelmed her. Something new, something she could bring with her.
Okay, so this game was is still in alpha stage, so most of the things are still missing. But I just wanted to show because we were just 3 people doing this, so we knew our resources, so we just tried to focus on the idea of changing the worlds between the real world and the spirit world. The green filtered world is the one with the world of the dead. So we just tried to create a very strong representation of that reality from the start, and design many game elements like collectibles, spells, and everything, considering how they're gonna sound. Is there any questions about this or anything so far? Okay. Okay, one last thing is that I was talking about sound designers not being in design positions. So I just try to fix this myself personally and try to make a game myself and see how it goes. So in this process, I just learned that the game is the point. So, okay, I've been talking about sound, it's important, but the most important thing is the game. So your sound design should, firstly, the first priority, it should support the game, and that's it. And if something is not working with sound, it's not that important because, well, this is what I experienced in the game production as a game lead. It's just the most important thing that the game should work. So sound is just a piece of the puzzle, but no puzzle is complete without even a single missing piece. So I think that's all I want to say today. Thank you. Do we have time for questions or comments? Anyone, anything? Yeah.
All right, thank you for the great presentation. You showed some examples from games like Limbo and Journey, which are not exactly AAA titles, but have very well integrated sound design in them. Do you know any kind of insider info? How were the design teams composed in those game projects? Did they outsource the audio design, or was it within the team?
In Limbo and what was the other one? Journey. Yeah, they both have in-team audio designers. In Limbo, they only have one composer who is also composer/sound designer, and in Journey they have a composer and also a sound designer, and they were also working together. The sound designer and the composer, they were working very closely. I happen to know it.
Right. Thank you.
So, do you think it's possible or realistic to make like a high-quality immersive game using a sound library and implementing the sound as a programmer?
Yeah, I think especially recently, like the last 3 years, there has been a really increase in good audio libraries. It is because there's an increase in indie audio libraries, and they are really successful. But the thing is, as I said, you can only use those sounds, but you will be probably missing a sound professional's own perspective, like a professional perspective, you know. And you will still have to edit most of those sounds anyway. Just make them shorter or longer, whatever, or just arrange the volumes. But the most important thing you'll be missing will be implementation. Well, it's of course possible. I mean, like, imagine Braid. It's a one-person game team, and it's an awesome game. Everything is possible, but probably it's going to be really hard and risky.
Okay,
That's
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's it. Thank you.
Let's thank Zan for his presentation.